Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1280. Aleph Reish Pei. And we concluded the paragraph speaking about the specific mitzvahs, as he put it on previous page. Yesh mitzvahs protius, he said in the beginning of the paragraph, the last page, 1279. There are specific mitzvahs, shayodam, that through them is drawn and generated a reflection also now, today, in this world, from the level of the energy that will be revealed in the future. Remember, we've been talking about that the ultimate schar mitzvah, the mitzvah, its powerful generating of energy from the very core of the essence to the deepest levels in the divine, Helam Atzmi, will be in L'Asid Lavi. And that is called the Gili of Yudke. That's Yudke. In unmasked form. Yudke in its pure form, not through the chiluf, the exchange, adbash, to Mem Tzadik. And Vavke, whereas in this world, the Gili is primarily Vavke, that which is revealed to us, and the Yudke is masked through the Mem Tzadik, as we learned. L'Asid Lavi, that will be removed, that garment, the Gili of Havaya in its purest form. But yet we have a taste of it. That we learned earlier. Different souls, different individuals. And now certain mitzvahs have a unique quality that, as I said here, that the Nimshach Ha'ara. And these are the things that the Mishnah in Peah says, that a person eats from their fruit in this world. That means in this world, you're eating from the fruit. Like he said, the tzmicha, the growth that comes from what? From the keren, which is kayemes, the principle, which will be preserved and forever. L'ased lave, l'elam haba. But we have perisein, schar gashmi me'en aschar aruchin d'elam haba. Similar to the spiritual reward that will be in elam haba. And that's what makes these mitzvahs unique, because they're connected, as he said, to the Gimel Rishenus, Keser, Chochma, Bina, and primarily Keser. Whereas the mitzvah, the other mitzvahs is really, today, the mitzvahs are really Hamshachim B'chinas Vovke. And from Yudke, as it manifests in the Mem Tzadik, through the Chiluv, the exchange. And these mitzvahs connect all the way to that core place. And the first mitzvah that he chose to explain was Kibbud Av'Eim. And explained it in two ways. One is that Kibbud Av'Eim is the aliyah of Chochmah and Bina, which is Abba ve'Ima, into the Yichud Pnimi, into an internal union, which allows them to experience the higher levels of Yudke. So Chochmah and Bina is Yudke, but they could be on their own, Yichud Chitzeni. That would be like the Yudke manifesting in the Mem Tzadik. They also could be relating to the Vavke in a regular way, like parents to children, or the Vavke can catapult them, and that's what Kibbud Av'Eim does. It allows the Yudke to go into a higher level of pure Yudke, Yichud Pnimi of Abba ve'Ima, and in turn radiate as well into the Vavke, that the Vavke should also be like Yudke, as we learned at length. That was the first explanation. Nachal Eson, that the Eson Hazrachi, the Shem Ab, from that deeper level of Atzmis Chachma, that drawn down into the Nachal, into the Midas. Yudke into Vavke, that Vavke becomes like Yudke. The second interpretation that he's, and that's Veheshev Leivavas Albanim, Leiv Banim Alavesam, that the children elevate. And what is the Aveda, he said? In Aveda, he called that, that is, before he said the Aveda was that the Aveda, muscle, the godless Abba, that the muscle, that maturity of the mind, that you reach into the deepest levels of the mind, and then the midas become higher than their natural wiring, they become on the level of Meichin. Later he said that the Aveda is that Chagas becomes, the midas become like a Merkava, a chariot that carries and elevates Chochmah Bina, Ava b'chol me'edecha, through that Nimshach Pnimius Abba ve'Ima, and that it should be revealed in Zun. Okay. And Aveda the Ru'usa Deliba Mokas HaMeichin Daf. The desire of the heart with the depth of the mind on this higher level. Okay. Then the second interpretation he brought from Zohar Vayikra on page 1280 that Abba Ve'ima is equated with Ma'eris, with the luminaries, sun and moon. In this case, Abba Ve'ima would be, father and mother would be like the sun and the moon, Zah and Malchus. And what's the Kibud Aveim? It's like Sarah who added to the Ma'eris. The luminaries have their light on their own. And the Kovid, the Kibud, is how Malchus goes down into the Berurim of Biyah, and through that elevates and reaches Tzchek Asali Elikim, a level of Tzchek and Tainug, inner joy and inner pleasure, inner laughter, that is mamshich from a higher level, and that is what Kibud Aveim does. That it adds, so it's the same idea, but now we're talking in Zohar Malchus, not in Chacham Bina. That it adds and increases, that Zohar Malchus should go to even a higher level, and their union, like he said at the end, is a Yichud Pnimi, these unions. So as we learned earlier, Yichud Abba Ve'ima and Yichud Zun connect to each other, because when there's an internal union in Chacham Bina that gives birth to the emotions, so then also that is an internal union between Zohar and Malchus, which gives birth to new neshamas, to the next world in Biyah. And those are the two explanations of Kibud Aveim. So we see from this how this mitzvah has in it, like you said at the beginning, a taste also now of the Ershis Galal Osid of the Yudke and the elevations that we will experience in the future. So we have a Me'ain Haskara that we have in this Elam Hazah. This is what Kibud Aveim is. Now he's going to move to the next in the list there, with Gemilas Chasodim. If I recall correctly, I think the Rabbi Rashabi is going to do Kibud Aveim, Gemilas Chasodim, Hava Shalom, Bein Adam L'Chavere, peace between one and another. And finally, with the end there is Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So he's going to actually enumerate 4 of the 10 of the items listed in the Mishnah and Pei that we say every morning. So now he's going to move to Gemilas Chasodim and also show how this, too, is from those unique mitzvahs, unlike others, where you get access to the Yudke, the unadulterated Yudke, as it will be in the future in the full glory. So, I will stop for a moment before we continue, if anybody has any questions on the Kibud Av that we spoke about or anything else, before we continue the new paragraph on 1280. So new paragraph on page 1280. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow the text. PDFs are available there. Now he goes, Gemilas Chasodim. Another item listed in this list of things that a human, that Adam, Eichel, eats from the Peresein Ve'elam Hazah, from the fruits in this world, and the Keren Kayemis Ve'elam Haba. So he says, Gemilas Chasodim. Now what's Gemilas Chasodim? Literally it means to bestow kindness. It's like the 3 pillars we say, Torah, Aveda, Gemilas Chasodim. So Gemilas Chasodim goes into the category of any Gemilas Chesed. Goimel Chesed means a person who bestows, who gives, is generating kindness. But as we'll see in a moment, there's different levels of kindness. And Gemilas Chasodim refers to, he says, Rav Chesed, the Arich. So in Chesed itself, we're going to learn now, there's 2 levels. There's the Rav Chesed of Arich, which means an abundance of Chesed in Arich Hampin. And then there's Chesed of Atzilus, that's not in Chesed Arich, it's Chesed in the Spheres, not in Arich, and that's called regular Chesed. And what's the difference? We're going to learn now the difference. But Gemilas Chasodim, he says, is referring to Rav Chesed of Arich. Shu B'chinas Bli Gvul. That's why it's called Rav Chesed. It's unlimited Chesed, unlimited love and kindness. U'Kaneda, as it's known, the Zeh Hefresh Bein Chesed the Zah LeChesed the Arich Hampin. So Zah is Zoyer Hampin and Arich Hampin. Interesting 2 names. Let me just explain that for a moment. The Zoyer Hampin means a small face. Hampin in Aramaic is ponim. So Zohar Ampin literally means ponim cotton, small face. Arich Ampin means a long face. Arich is from the word Arich, from length, the large face. Now, why is it called face? Because a face, a parzuf, is a structure. It's a configuration of several things. So you call it the structure. The Arich Ampin is the great structure, so to speak, the unlimited one. And Zohar Ampin is a limited version of it, which is in the Esesphiras. The difference is Zohar Ampin is in the conscious faculties. When you talk about human faculties, it's Chesed in your heart, in your human faculties, in the soul. Arich Ampin is superconscious. Remember, it's Chesed. It's higher than Chachma. Chachma is the first of the conscious faculties, the first of the conscious cognitive faculties, which then leads Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chesed, Yesod, Malchus. Chesed is within the conscious, and therefore it's a limited flow. Arich Ampin, so he's not going to explain the difference, as it's known the difference between the two. The Chesed, the Zah, Chesed of Zohar Ampin, the lower level, Yeshle Hefsek, has a pause. It has some type of limit. It's not unlimited flow. It ceases to flow. Chesed Zuta. That's why it's called a small Chesed. Zuta 2 means there's Rabba and Zuta. Zuta 2 is similar to Zohar. It means a small Chesed. And Chesed Rabba would be, Chesed Rav would be an abundant one. Because this type of love and kindness is with limits. It's finite. The Sibas Adovan, and the cause for this fact that it's finite, why then it's God's chesed? Why shouldn't it flow endlessly? But because the oir in Zohar Ampin comes in a diminished and a concealed way. However, Aval Chesed, the Arich Ampin, the higher level of Chesed of Arich Ampin, hu b'chinas Chesed shebli gvul legamri. That's a kindness that's completely endless, ceaseless, completely unlimited. It says legamri. And this is now, so okay, so now, so we already see that Gemilas Chasodim, which is going on Rav Chesed of Arich, is a level that is not just from our time. It's a futuristic level of Gilui. Because today everything is big vul, it's big tzimtzum. And yet Gemilas Chasodim, that when we do Gemilas Chasodim in an unlimited way, that in turn draws and generates a taste or a similarity, a semblance of the revelation of Yud Kei and L'Asad Love. But he's going to get back to that. Meanwhile, he's going to continue to explain Gemilas Chasodim. V'zeu, any questions before I continue? Pretty clear, right? V'zeu, the Isa, the Medrash Rabbah, and this is what it says in Medrash Rabbah. In Medrash, al posik, v'oseh chesed imadeni. So Avraham Avinu says, please do kindness with your imadeni.
V'asei chesed imadeni, Eliezer said when he went to look for a color for Yitzchok.
So do chesed imadeni with my master, meaning Avram. So the Medrash says, "Hakol tzrichim lechesed afilu Avram." Everybody needs kindness, even Avram Avinu. Even though Avram is chesed, everybody needs chesed. As you see here from this expression, the chesed Avram. Why does Avram need chesed? Because the kindness of Avram, hu b'chinas chesed dezah, is the chesed of zah. V'yesh lehefsek mitzah b'chinas hagvura hamenagedes lechesed. So now we add something. It has a limit, the chesed of Avram, due to the fact that just as chesed, there's also gvura. Gvura is an equal force within the faculties, and gvura opposes chesed. Opposes here doesn't necessarily mean an enemy. It means gvura will challenge. If someone says, Avram says, do chesed, the gvura within him will say, 1 second, does this person deserve it? Do they deserve an endless chesed? So Gvura is the discipline that counters the free flow of Chesed. That's Avram on his own. Ach, Chesed Arich Ampin, however, but Chesed of Arich Ampin, the less smaller Bahayatika, Because there's no smaller, there's no gvura in the level of atik, which of course is nimshach and is drawn into arich, ein lo hefsek. So in the conscious faculties, chesed has a counterforce called gvura, which is what he said before, tzimtzum, miyut and tzimtzum, that regulates the flow and limits it. And that's why even Avram needs chesed, because to create the unlimited flow, it comes from arich ampin, which is connected to atik, less smaller by atik. There's no gvura in atik, so therefore the chesed is an ein lo hefsek. The chesed is a never-ending one. Valkain, and therefore, mibchinas rav chesed nimshach ha'er v'agili ad lamata mato. So he's adding another point now. Not only is it bli gvul that flows without end, another thing, because it's such an intense love, it also flows the oir and gili all the way below. In other words, the chesed b'hagabala, besides the fact that it has a limit and an end, it also doesn't reach everywhere. But Rav Chesed has another quality that it reaches everywhere, even to the lowest level. And he says, "U'kamoshi is boy," in the parentheses. So this is clearly he's setting the stage for something he's going to speak about later. Discuss this more at length. This Rav Chesed, Kamoshi is boy, as shall be explained. Okay, so now he's going to add another point regarding this. So far we've established Rav Chesed is this bligvul and goes lamata mata, and that's why the Medrash says that even Avram needs Chesed, because on his own, it's Chesed of the limited Chesed, is the Rav Chesed that draws the endless Chesed. The Gam Neida, another thing, it's also known, Shezeu HaChesed Shemitzad Gedulas Ha'Ein Sof. So he's adding another piece to the story. That this Chesed of Arich Ampin is due to the fact that is coming from Gedulas Ha'Ein Sof. So let me explain this a moment before we read on. In a way, he's coming to explain why Taka is Arich Ampin different than Zohar Ampin. Why is the Chesed of Arich Ampin unlimited? And why is the Chesed of Zohar limited? So yes, the answer is because one is subject to Tzimtzum and Gvura, and the other is not. But Haguf Kash, what makes them different? What is that? How is their personality different? So what he's introducing now is an important point, and I want to explain it with with an example or two. In general speaking, when we're talking about God revealing Himself, meaning that we should have an experience of godliness, a divine experience, as well as an aravodah to connect to God. So you have different ways that God expresses Himself. Sometimes it's in a limited form, sometimes it's an unlimited form. For example, Chassidus brings from the Akedas Yitzchak. It's a sefer. It's a sefer from one of the Yitzchak Aroma. It's one of the middle-aged scholars. That there are two ways that we can experience God's godliness, the greatness of God. One is through nature, where we see the consistency of nature. The sun, the moon, the celestial bodies, everything is the seasons. Tamid in Chesed, you see lo yushbesu. You see an incessant and consistency that tells you, wow, look how God is running the choreographer, the conductor that makes everything very consistent. And the second way, he says, is through nisim, through miracles, which is the exact opposite. A miracle suspends nature. But what it reveals is a power of God that is greater than nature. And he explains that this is the difference between Nisan and Tishrei. One is revealing God through the greatness of miracles, God's that power, and one is through God through the consistency. So when you say there are things what does a nest do that nature doesn't do? Nature shows you God's consistent flow to the point to a T, that everything is perfect. Just look at how a child is born. Look at anything in nature. It's just amazing the way it works in this, like a clock, without any shift. But a miracle reveals, Chassidus explains, the grandeur of godliness, that God is not limited by anything, that He can part the sea, and can perform other miracles. So the things there are things that reveal the greatness of God through a flow, through a limited flow. And what he's saying now is not this chesed of Arich Ampin is manifesting and expressing the Gedula Ein Sof, God's unlimited part of himself. So there are things, the bligvul of the Eibishter reveals to us the bligvul of, when we see bligvul like Gemilas Chasodim without Rav Chesed, without limit, that reveals to us the bligvul of Elikus, the unlimited flow, and the gvul of Elikus. And when you see God flowing in a structured way, like for example in a human body, the wonder is the opposite, not that it flows endlessly. The fact that the blood knows exactly how much to flow, how much not to flow. The fact that the valves in the heart open and close, that when you eat food, the windpipe closes, that everything is so structured and limited is actually the wonder. But then there are things in Ishtalshlus and higher than Ishtalshlus that God wants to reveal his bligvul. So he's saying that this level of chesed is coming mitzad Gedula Ein Sof, the greatness of Ein Sof, to demonstrate this unlimited element in godliness. I am Mashin is bar le'il dibra mashal v're'isi ani. So he refers us back to volume 1 where that idea is discussed. And here it says v'hashpa shemitzad hagedula, that when something comes from that place of greatness, God's greatness in the sense that unlimited greatness that he has, hu shanimsha b'kol mokim. When it comes on that level, that goes everywhere. It's like we say, Lamai Lamai La'aden Ketz, Lamat Lamat Aden Tachlis. It doesn't have any limit. That chesed can be found everywhere. The first level of chesed can be found everywhere. Its whole purpose is to be contained in a particular limited flow. But the Rav Chesed Tzad Gedula Ein Sof, and Ashpa that comes from there is unlimited. And also goes everywhere. Like he said before, Ad Lamata Mata. And now he's going back to the mitzvah of Gemilas Chasodim. This explained the Rav Chesed, what Gemilas Chasodim is connected with. Now he's going to talk, what do we do when we are Gemil Chesed, when we bestow, when we show and demonstrate and give kindness to others? He says, V'zeu the Gemilas Chasodim, shu hashpa b'ribui, which is referring to hashpa b'ribui, that we are giving in abundance. Mamshichim, we drawing down. Mibchinas Rav Chesed the Arich. That's what Gemilas Chasodim does. Just like he said before, Kibud Ava'im draws from Abba Ve'ima, the Yichud Pnimi, all the way to the highest levels of Yudke, draws it down into the Vavke. The same thing here. Gemilas Chasodim transmit Mamshichim. It draws and generates from where? Not from Chesed of Zah, from Rav Chesed the Arich. Shenim Shecha Gam Lamata. That should also come down below, meaning the lowest levels, even in this world, not just La'asid Lave and Elam Haba. So here we see that Gemilas Chasodim too has that element. Now, you can ask the question, the fact is when we give Gemilas Chasodim, it's not unlimited. We're human beings, and even if you have all the money in the world, you can't just give everything. It's not going to be bleak vul. But the answer to that is that what's expected of us in Gemilas Chasodim is the concept of like b'chol moedecha, that it has to be your bligvul, meaning as you're giving not just by calculation. So there's a level of Gemilas Chasodim, or rather we can call it tzedakah, where there's a calculation. You're giving a fifth, or you're giving 10% or 20%, meiser or chemish. I should say 10% or a fifth or a tenth. And that's a measure. As a matter of fact, there it says, Al yivazbez adam yesem a chemish. A person certain splurge more than a chemish, more than 20%. There are instances that Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, that when it's negei benefesh, kol asher adam yitin ba'ad nafshei, that people give even more than that. But Gemilas Chasodim is considered to be higher than that. Gedele Gemilas Chasodim, because Gemilas Chasodim means that you're not giving with limits on your level. And that, in turn, draws down from Rav Chesed of Arich. So now we have Gemilas Chasodim. And that finishes. We're going to move now to the next one. But if anybody has any questions, Now is a good time because now the next is going to be, the next item is Havah Shalom Ben Adam L'Chavere. Bringing peace, creating peace between one person and another. Go ahead. Any question?
So a regular Gemilas Chasodim is reaching higher than the Gemilas Chasodim of Avram, reaching Rav Chesed?
Avram also reached Rav Chesed. That's why Avram needed Chesed.
He said that Chesed Avram is Chesed is Zoh. V'yesh lo hefsek.
That's why he needs also the Hamshach from Arich. He also got the Hamshach. On his own, he's that way. But it says that's the whole point. To say that even Avram needs Chesed and he gets Chesed for Rav Chesed, just like everybody.
Thank you.
Now, what that means practically, Avram did what he could do. And I assume then he got when he did more, he got Hamshach from a higher level. But the point is that there's completely on his own, and then there's what is achieved through further work. I'm sure Avram went beyond the letter of the law in his Gemilas Chasodim, so he was Mamshech for Rav Chesed. But it means that it's higher than he is than Zoh on its own. That's the point. Yeah. Any other questions?
When I said earlier that the delayed smola, a higher tika, ain lo hefsek, but we're talking about Arich, not Ati.
So I explained that Atik communicates with Arich. They are both two halves of Chesed. So clearly he's saying that Arich has access to that element of less smaller Bahayatika.
So would it be right to say that there's no smaller in Arich?
That's not the expression. It says less smaller Bahayatika, but because Atik and Arich are connected, so therefore Arich also has an element of that. That's how I would phrase it.
And also, don't we learn that Chesed B'li Gvul is oftentimes not the proper action? It needs to be balanced by Gevurah. So what's the advantage here of bringing from this level of Rav Chesed that's beyond B'li?
Well, because we're talking about Chesed of Gedusha. When you're talking about the Chesed you just mentioned is the Chesed of Yishmael or of Plishtim, where there it's just love without discipline, and therefore the love goes to the wrong places. Here he's talking about Rav Chesed of Arich. So when you say less smaller Bahayatika, you're not talking about no Gvur in a negative way. You're talking about no Gvur in a positive way, that the divine flow is unlimited. Then there's another type of Chesed of the Umazeh. When you look in Tanya, in Kotenti Mikol Achsodim, in Geras HaKedesh, the second Geras HaKedesh, he talks about difference between Chesed of Gedusha and Chesed of Klippa. So what you're referring to is a Chesed coming from the wrong place, and it's like spoiling your children type of thing, where you're giving Chesed without measuring it. Here he's talking about a Chesed that's coming from a Lakus, a Rav Chesed that's it's unceasing in the flow in a positive way. And it's true, that too also has to be. It doesn't mean you always have Rav Chesed. Gemilas Chasodim touches that part. Remember, there's also a need for Chesed of Zoh. This does not override the need of Chesed of Avram in a structured way. He's just adding that there's also a level of a higher flow, of a B'li Gvul flow. And they're connected, Like, for example, it says that the first 26 generations before Matan Torah is Chavav Dei is Nizunim B'chazdish Al Kadosh Baruch Hu. They were primarily getting their sustenance from God's Chesed. That's why they lived long, especially in the first 10 generations before the Mabul, because it was a Rav Chesed. But Rav Chesed has a downside too, that you can spoil someone. So you have to know whether you're talking in Kedusha or you're talking in the other side. Here he's clearly talking in Kedusha. A person not just limiting themselves, like Gemilas Chasodim, that they're a free flow in that sense. And that's what creates the Rav Chesed. And that is, as I said, the levels from Arich, which connect to Atik, which is connected to L'Asid Lavi. Okay?
So in practicality, it would come down to meaning like that a person can give a lot more than they think they can give of themselves or their possessions, that they can reach and
like
deep down.
Meidecha, like I said, not just B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Meidecha. That's one aspect of it, to give more than just the calculated giving of tzedakah. And number two, which you see people do, and no one's saying to do it in a way that's reckless. The point is you're going further than you're giving until it hurts, so to speak, giving more than your regular. And the second thing is, we know Gemilas Chasodim doesn't talk about it here. talks about it more in the Pod of Shalom Maimer and Ayin Hey in the volume 2. The difference between Tzedakah and Gemilas Chasodim. Tzedakah is charity. Gemilas Chasodim can be a favor, can be a loan. So in that sense, you can give a lot more that way. He doesn't say it explicitly, but it could be he's also referring to that. Okay. So now comes item number 3. V'hava shalom. You can see this as like not a new paragraph, but it's the next one. V'hava shalom ben admin lechavere. Literally means that someone makes an effort to bring peace, a peacemaker. Literally means hava shalom, bringing peace between a person and chavere and his friend or another. Like we talk about Aaron HaKoyen. Have a mitalmid of shalom. Oyev shalom v'reidav shalom. Oyev sabrius and mekarvan l'teira. Oyev shalom v'reidav shalom, that he was a peacemaker. He would go to people who had disagreements and found ways that they reconcile. So he's going to explain now, what is this level? How is this a reflection of la'asid loved? Pirush Arizal, that Arizal explains who's Adam and Chavere. Just like we spoke before, father and mother, who's Adam and Chavere? Arizal teaches you're making peace between Arich Ampin L'Zah. Between Arich Ampin and Zah. That's Adam and Chavere. These two levels we just discussed in Chesed. Arich Ampin is a level that's a superconscious state in Chesed, the lower level of Chesed. And you're making peace, you're reconciling, uniting Arich Ampin between Arich Ampin and Zohar Ampin.
Maybe that's is not starting a new paragraph. Avas Shalom. It's the same thing.
We'll see. He's also going to talk Talmud Torah. We'll see. He's going to bring it all together. It's all connected. Yeah. V'hainu. This means sha'er k'moshu b'arich Ampin, that the energy level, the way it radiates in Arich Ampin, yoyer begilui b'bchina zah, should radiate in a revealed way in the level of zah. So Arich Ampin and zah on their own are two different domains. They both have a role to play, which is fine. But to make avah shalom ben adam l'chavere, that's a particular type of avodah that the Arizal says is the shalom between Arich Ampin, that the energy, the oir of Arich Ampin should radiate b'chin zah. I was going to come back to it, I believe, soon, but now he's going to go to Gemara and Kedushin. So even right there, we have enough to say that Avah Shalom is also the Gilui of Arich Ampin, which is the Gilui we talked about earlier, like Yudke. It doesn't say explicitly Yudke here because Yudke is usually Chacham and Bina, but it's definitely a Gilui that's higher than Ishtalshus, higher than the regular flow. And that's why when you reconcile, you unite Arich and Zah. When you unite Adam and Chaveri, you draw down this level of Arich into Zah, which is similar to the idea we just spoke about Gemilas Chasodim, which is similar to the idea of Kibbud Av'aim, obviously all on different levels. Kibbud Av'aim, it was Chacham and Bina and Zah and Malchus. Now we're talking higher, Arich Ampin and Zah, just to point out that it could be the addition of these two is that we're reaching even higher levels. Again, he doesn't spell it out explicitly, but that's what it appears. Okay. Now, the Gemara in Kedushin that we're going to read now essentially cites the Mishnah in Peah that we've been talking about. Elo hadvarim she'odam eichel perisein be'elam hazeh. And here's what the Gemara says. The Gemara Kedushin, Daf Mem, page 40. Isa, that the reason that these mitzvahs, you eat from the fruits in this world, there's a reason for it, it says there. Mishum, the elo hadvarim hein tev l'shamayim v'tev l'briyas. Because these items are both good for heaven and good for earth. Other mitzvahs can be tev l'shamayim, and you don't necessarily see the tev l'briyas, at least not in a revealed way. And then there are mitzvahs, you see the Tev Lebrius, like Ben Adam L'Chavere, and not necessarily the Tev L'Shamayim directly. Again, it's always a mitzvah from Hashem, so it's always good for heaven. But the difference is, Tev L'Shamayim, these mitzvahs have a quality that you have both good for heaven and good for earth. Ben Adam L'Mokim, Ben Adam L'Chavere. So the Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain how that comes into this picture here. Va'ayin mashin is bar le'il, and delve or learn what was explained earlier. Dibra maskul shlach lecha habeis, the second mimer called shlach lecha, and on the bottom they give us the footnote. That's in volume 2, page 1031. Be'inyan ubetuve mechadish. So there he talked about when he said mechadish betuve bechol yom ma'aseh bereishis, that God renews His energy in ma'aseh bereishis. But there's an additional word. It says mechadish betuve or betuve mechadish, as we discussed then. What's the tuve? That He does it with goodness. He does it with kindness. What's the addition of, not just He's renewing it, He's doing it with a generosity of spirit. So what's the tuve mechadish? So he explained there that the toiv is referring to shubchinas eir hagonus. That you can say God renews the energy on a more chitzenius level. Like we spoke earlier, yichud chitzeni, there's an energy even when we're asleep. The soul is continuing to give life to the body, but it's in a very minimal way. We say, ubetuve mechadish, you're saying it's coming from Tev Hagonus, or Er Hagonus. He's giving from his, and he explained there why Tev, God's goodness is coming from Er Hagonus, a hidden Er. Even the concealed Er, a more primistic, a hidden Er, is also being used here to renew the energy in existence. Shal zen nemar, and that's what he explained. This is all back from that Maimer, Shlach Lecha in volume 2. What does that mean? That God saw the light and it was good. So everyone asked the question, what did He see that it was? Why would He think it wouldn't be good? It's God's creation. Of course it's good. And did He not know it's good? He has to see it to say it's good. So one of the explanations is that the Teiv is not just that it's Oyer, that God saw that the Oyer, but He saw that the Oyer had this Eir Hagonus, a deeper light, like He says, Ki tev lignes, p'nei shu l'mayla me'erech ha'elemis. God saw that this Oyer is very intense and powerful, and Ki tev lignes, that it's appropriate and right to conceal it because it's higher than erech ha'elemis. That God created a light that on its that if it did not conceal, that's why it says that the light created on the first day is called Er Shenivra B'Yom Rishon. The light created on the first day of creation is not the light that we know of today. That Er Gonuz, God concealed it, and sometimes it says He hid it in the Torah, that through Torah we can access it, and sometimes it says He gonze le tzadikim, that He hid it for tzadikim. And I think it also says gonze la'asad lavi. It hid it that la'asad lavi will be revealed. So in other words, what happened on day one was more than just the creation of light as we know it. And it's obvious regardless, because the question is asked, what kind of light was there, when we know that until day 4, there was no creation of the sun and the moon. And it's the sun that creates sunlight and daylight. So what kind of light was there in the first 4 days, the first 3 days, especially day 1? So there's a long discussions on this topic, that the Eish and Ivra B'Yom Rishon is a unique light that God created. The very powerful Sikha from the Rebbe in Chelik Yud, Likutei Sichos, volume 10, on Bereshis, where he talks about it, because everything has to begin with light, but the light itself is a light that's more intense than the world can receive. So the Eibishter saw a Kitev, Tev Lignes, to conceal it because it's higher than being commensurate to the worlds. It's somewhat like a Gili from Lifnei Tzimtzum. So even though the Kav is revealed after the tzimtzum, but the oir, sheniver b'yem rishon, has elements of it that are like pre-tzimtzum. That's what it says in some places. But regardless, here he's saying it's er hagonus. So we say, but tuve mechadish, that he's accessing this toiv, the concealed er gonus of er, v'hu er shehivdiloi la'atzmei. And that's also the explanation. There's also an expression. This er, he's separated for himself. Like similar to what we learned earlier about the er meir la'atzmei. He created a light because he wanted the light, as we've talked at length, er ein sof, is there should be expression, there should be revelation, but in er itself, there are levels that remain so-called in God's inner domain, remain within, hivdili la'atzmei, separated for himself. I'm on page 1281 on top, like it says elsewhere. And it was also explained earlier, which also goes back to volume 2. So if you want more, the Rebbe Rashab is giving us the sources where more information on this topic. But regardless, so far, he's talking about Toiv. Remember, Tev l'shamayim, Tev l'briyas. That's going to be the connection. So this is the level of Toiv. V'hu inyan ubetuvcha hagadol. When we say ubetuvcha hagadol, in your great kindness or your great goodness, or your abundant tuvcha, your goodness, what level is that? B'chinas tev ha'atzmi da'atzmus ein sof. This is not just the good that God reveals and gives us good on our terms. This is a called teva atzmi, a core goodness that comes from this higher level of atzmus ein sof.
This is Rav Chesed Arich.
He doesn't say right now. We'll see. We'll see. So far, we don't know. And now he's going to go back to what the Gemara in Kedushin says. What means Tev l'shamayim and Tev l'briyas? She says the Tev l'shamayim kuam shoche ba'atzilus. That's a transmission that manifests by Atzilus. The Tev l'briyas kuam shoche gam b'biyah. And Tev l'briyas means the Amshocha also goes into biyah. Briya yitzir asir. Kumeshakasa b'sidr. The Pirush Baruch Merachem ala briyas. The Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe composed and published it. It's from the Maimorim that he heard from the Alter Rebbe. He organized it in the order of the Siddur. It's called Siddur im Dach. Many of you may have seen or have it. So there in the Maimor, that's on the discourses there in explaining Baruch Merachem ala briyas, he explains this idea that Tev l'shamayim is an Atzilus, and Tev l'briyas goes even further, brings the Tev into Biyah. So, but Pashtus, even though he doesn't spell it out, because now he's going to move to Talmud Torah, Neged Kulam, which is another item. Let me explain how I understand what he's saying here. So after explaining that Kibbud Avayim we spoke about was Yudke Vovke was in Atzilus itself, from Chochma Bina Yudke to Vovke Midas, and Zon Malchus unto Biyah, and that elevates it to the Yichud Pnimi. Okay. Then he said about Rav Chesed is Gemilas Chasodim, that's drawn down into Zoh. And then he said Havah Shalom Ben Adon L'Chavere is Arich also into Zoh. So it seems to me that with the Gemara Kedushin, Tev l'shamayim, Tev l'briyas, now that we know that it's coming from Teva Atzmi, which very likely could be the level of Rav Chesed, because Chesed and Tev sometimes go together. Rav Chesed, so that would be like Teva Atzmi, but maybe now I can't say for sure. He doesn't explicitly say it, but it's definitely similar level. So what's happening here is Teva Atzmi from Atzmus Ein Sof, which is the Er Hivdila La'atzme, which we know is like the levels of Yudke. That's the Gili La'atzme, the Er Hamer La'atzme. And so that is what the Gemara in Kedushin says, that these mitzvahs have that element that they both draw from the Teva Atzmi into Atzilus, and Tev L'Briyas also into Biyah. Now, does he mean by that like, for example, that's what Gemilas Chasodim does? Correct. It draws from Rav Chesed into Zoh, into Atzilus. And also, ultimately, Gemilas Chasodim also downward into, he didn't say Biyah. When you say Hava Shalom ben Adam l'Chaverei, it connects, it draws Arich into Zoh as well. So it sounds like that he's talking about.
The Arizal is saying it. Ben Arich anpin lezo, the Arizal.
I know, I'm exactly what I'm saying. Okay. So the Gemara Kedushin is not 100% clear, but it seems to be that he's trying to say that it's a Tev Atzmi that's being drawn both in Atzilus and into Biyah. That's what it seems like he's saying, but it's very brief. I would advise that we continue on, because I think once we understand what he's going to say afterwards, we may come back and be able to understand what he's explaining the Gemara in Kedushin better. Tevel Shemaim, Tevel Brius. The Ma'arim Erech elements, that's Atzmei. Teva Atzmei. Yeah, that's Bapashtus what he's saying. That you have the higher Amshachah coming down into Atzilus and all the way to Biyah. And that's the addition here. So these goes all the way into Biyah, like we said, Chesed goes all the way Lamata Mata. Anybody want to ask anything? Because as I said, there'll be more clarity, I believe, once we read on. Because he's going to go now to the last item, which is Talmud Teda Keneged Kulam. So here, not only is Talmud Teda one of these items that you eat from the fruit in this world, but it says Keneged Kulam. Means it's equal to all the ones above. So it's even greater than the others. And he's going now the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain that. But I want to stop if there's any questions before we continue.
Does that the Divrei Masur Balasacha Hagimel, would that bring, because to me it's still cryptic about what's the Chiddush here. I mean, any act of whether it's kindness or Yiras Shamayim or Yiras Hashem, everything comes from a level. Its shorish is in the levels of Arich, and then we bring it down to go.
Not necessarily. You can do goodness, like we said before. You could do tzedakah limited, and you're drawing from Chesed of Zah. You can do kindness and good, and it's drawing from Teiv. That's not Teiva Atzmi.
So basically, it's saying this is explaining on this mitzvah specifically how it relates to Mo'odecha, the level of going above the structure and bringing it down.
He's explaining the Gemara. The Gemara says that all these items are good for heaven and good for earth. And he's explaining what that means, because these mitzvahs draw down from Arich and Atzmus Ein Sof from the higher levels down below. That's essentially what he's saying. In the Gemara Kedushin, he's not spelling out which one of them. He says all of them. Atev l'Shemaim, Tev l'Bris, and the Rebbe Rashab is explaining the Gemara.
But when we shake an esrog, aren't we also bringing down ultimately Hamshaka from?
Not correct. Esrog brings from Chasodim of Atzilus. The whole point of this whole thing is Eila Hadvarim. These are the things the Mishnah says. The question of the Rebbe Rashab was, aren't all mitzvahs drawing down that energy? And he says, no, not all mitzvahs do. Some mitzvahs do, some mitzvahs don't. Go back to page 1279. He said explicitly, these things that the Mishnah enumerates are different than other mitzvahs, because the other mitzvahs draw down from Yud-K in Mem Tzadik and Vav-K, and this mitzvahs draw all the way purely from Yud-K. That's the whole point he's saying here. That's the whole theme here, that this Mishnah is saying that these mitzvahs are unique. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining their uniqueness.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Now that doesn't mean the other mitzvahs don't play an important role. Of course they do. And la'asad lav eschar mitzvah, all mitzvahs will be revealed as they reach the deepest levels. But there are some that we have more revelation or more access to in our time, azman hazeh. That's the key. All mitzvahs are Yud-K, Vav-K, mitzvah. But the question is how much beislapshus. That was the whole point that he was making, that Omnam Achshav, if you go back page 1278, 1279, he talks about that today there are levels of revelation. And not everyone is going to have that full, and certain mitzvahs have unique quality. That's what he's saying here. So now he says, Umasha Talmud Teda Neged Kulam.
Why are these mitzvahs unique? What makes them different from the other mitzvahs?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Isn't this what we're learning the last 3 pages?
No, we know that this is Yud K, not in the Mem Tzadik.
What do you mean?
Why?
Go back. He said the reason. Why is it? Why don't you read back? I suggest reading again what we've learned because it says it already. He says, Va'atam. Here, there's a line on page 1279. He asked this question. Va'atam de elu advarim dafke. Why these mitzvahs specifically? Adam echom peresem be'elam hazeh. Hu mepnei shemitzvahs elu hem begimel reshenes ve'ikram bebchinas hakesed. So he explained that's exactly these mitzvahs uniquely are in Gimel Shenish, which primarily is the level of Chesed. Now you're asking why these mitzvahs in Chesed, not others? That you could ask about everything. Why is Arich and Zah? That's the way God made it. He made certain mitzvahs have different qualities, just like why Pesach is not Shavuos and Shavuos is not Sukkot. Everything has its role to play. Okay.
Does this, when it lists those Eilu Devarim, these are the mitzvahs that we receive it, these 10 mitzvahs that have this special quality of being able to mamshik now in times of Galus, this level of Yud K that doesn't come through the permutation of Mem Tzadik. Is that an exhaustive list or an exemplary list? Could there be more like that, or is the Rebbe saying that
it's not the Rebbe, it's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says it. Eilu Advarim. You're asking a question on the Mishnah. These are the things, the Mishnah says these are the things that a person eats from the fruit in this world and the Keren Kayemas Elam Haba. The Rebbe Rashab is simply explaining the Mishnah. The Mishnah says these. Right. You're asking whether the Mishnah, are there exceptions? I would go look. I mean, the pshat in the Mishnah seems these things and not others. It seems to be exclusionary, but you can go look it up in the Mishnah and see if there are, if anyone asks questions like that. Are there other mitzvahs that seem to, why are they not included? That's a legitimate question. But the Rebbe Rashab is simply taking off on the Mishnah here, where the Mishnah says these are unique mitzvahs, and he's explaining what they are and why they are that way. Okay. Umasha Talmud Teda Neged Kulam. Maybe we should stop here. I'll read a few more lines. Umasha Talmud Teda Neged Kulam. Neged Kulam, as it says at the end there in the Mishnah, that Talmud Teda, learning Teda, study of Teda is equal to all of them. Neged Kulam corresponds to all the above, all these items. So they say, Hu shebeteda nichlolim kol ela hadvarim. That means that the Teda is encompassed all these items. Kibud aveim, Gemilas Chasodim, Havar Shalom ben Adam lechaveri. The other things he mentions are all included and encompassed in Teda. The Teda shebiksav, the Teda shebal peh. So Talmud Teda includes the written Teda and the oral Teda. Hein bchinas Abba ve'ima. They are chochma bina. Musar avicha Teda shebiksav, v'Teda simecha Teda shebal peh. So Musar avicha, Av, the father, is the written Teda. The Teda simecha, the Teda of the mother, of your mother, is the oral Teda. So we see that in Talmud Teda, you have both Chacham and Bina encompasses all of them. The Kibud Ava'im, now he's connecting it. Kibud Ava'im that we learned earlier is what? Is Abba Va'ema, who inyan limud Teda l'shma. In Aveda, Lamaila, is learning Teda l'shma, lahamshich erein sof b'Teda al yidei Aveda b'chol me'idecha. Oh, okay. This is very brief and needs explanation, but let me just, I'm going to stop here at this period. But then he says now that Kibud Aveim, based on this, that Abba ve'ima is Chachma and Bina, which is Teda and Teda shebiksav, Teda shebal peh, So what is it referring to? The learning of Torah Lishma. Remember, we said Kibud adds to Chachma and Bina. Not just that you're learning Torah, but you're learning it Lishma, which is what? Not just learning Torah to understand Torah, but to draw down Ein Sof from a higher level into Chachma and Bina, into Abba ve'Ima, into Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. And how do you do that? Through the love, B'chol Me'idecha, that love that goes beyond all limits. As we explained earlier, like we said before, that the Midas elevate the Moichin all the way to the Etzem. And why? Because the Midas have now grown to a point of B'chol Me'idecha, Ava B'chol Me'idecha, which catapults and elevates Chachma and Bina, Abba ve'Ima, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, to Ein Sof, and drawing down the Ein Sof into Torah, into Chachma and Bina. So that's a connection between Talmud Torah and Kibud Aveim. So we see that one of them, Kibud Aveim, is encompassed in Talmud Torah as a similar idea, similar Hamshachah. I'm going to stop here. So 6 lines from the top of page 1281. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, that Ava there, is it referring to Ava Hashem or Ava Torah? That Ava and Ima, we just said is Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. The love.
The pasuk it says, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol meidecha." So Haftas Hashem Elokecha, loving God. But when you do that, you're drawing down Ein Sof into Torah.
But I thought the Kibud Aveim, the Ava name here is Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh. So to give honor to your Abba and Ima, Torah Shebiksav, you should have a love maybe for Torah, Abba to Torah. That is
It's not what he's saying. It's not what he's saying here. Yeah. You're processing too much. That's not what he's saying here. The way you give covet to Chachma and Bina, Torah, is by learning Lishma and loving God. So you draw God into the Torah. That's what he's saying. So it's not about honoring the parents. It's about drawing into the parents, honoring them by drawing from a higher level into them.
Can you briefly explain what Lishma means?
You could do mitzvahs and learn Torah shalei lishma, which means for ulterior motives. You learn it because you enjoy learning. You like the academic exercises. You could learn it because you think you're going to get reward in this world or in the world to come. You could learn Torah because you're getting honor, that you're a teacher or you're smart. You can learn Torah for many different reasons. Some people learn Torah actually for negative reasons. Lishma means you're not learning it for your ulterior motives, but you're learning it lishma for the thing itself. In this case, for the sake of learning Torah itself, in this case, learning it because God gave you the Torah and said, learn it. So doing that, you're drawing godliness into the Torah. When you do it for your own ulterior motive, that doesn't mean you're not learning Torah. But you can't say you're drawing from Ein Sof because you're not thinking about Ein Sof. You're thinking about yourself. So the Torah, you have some element. There's still a mitzvah. But to say Torah Lishma, you can't say.
If you have any pleasure from it, you're out of the
didn't say that. I never
Lishma.
said the word. I didn't say any pleasure. The question is, why are you learning it? If you're learning it just because of your pleasure, it has nothing to do with God, or has nothing to do with any higher reason, then it's not Lishma. And there's many levels of Lishma and Shalei Lishma. Doesn't say you can't have pleasure. It's a question of the reason, the ulterior motive. If you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva talks about that La'olam Yasik Adam B'Torah Mitzvah Shalei Lishma Shemetech Shalei Lishma Bo Lishma. All of us, except Avram Avinu, he says there, cannot do things purely Lishma. We always have an ulterior motive. But you can grow from that to a less ulterior motive. If you look in Tanya, chapter 10, he also explains it. That tzaddikim are what he calls there is Ezu Chassid HaMeschassid Im Koinei. Who's a chassid? The one who does kindness with his nest, with his master. In other words, you're doing it for God, for purpose of God, not for your own purposes. That's just a general difference, but there's a lot about this. If you go back to volume 1, if I recall, there's around 20 pages just on this topic. Whether you're learning Torah, adaita denafshi means, like we learned at length earlier, you're doing mitzvahs or serving Aveda because it's good for you. You know God is great, and God gives you life and sustenance, so you're learning it for your, so it's God on your terms. When you bench, thank you for giving me food. And then there's learning Torah and doing mitzvahs on God's terms, not for your sake, but for God's sake. And then there's a combination of both, obviously. That's the whole mutva murgish muskel. As we grow from our subjective interests, we start doing things for not just for ourselves, but also for a higher purpose for God. Now, tzaddikim do that in the fullest sense of the word. By us, it usually can be a mix. We can do something, but it's both, like you said, tevla shamayim, tevla briyas. That's good for heaven and good for us. Even though that's not what he's...
The Alter Rebbe in Perek in Tanya is also saying, he brings from there, ולשמו היינו כדי לקשר נפש של השם על ידי הסוגוס הטרו, איש כפי שכלו כמו שכוס פריץ חיים.
You're talking about Perek Daled?
Perek Hey, at the end. לשמו היינו כדי לקשר נפש של השם על ידי הסוגוס הטרו.
There are different levels in the Shema, just for the record as well. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
If a person is learning Torah,
We'll stop here. What?
If a person is learning Torah just to know what to do, how to fulfill the mitzvahs, that's considered for himself, or is that considered, if he's really truly doing it to learn, is that also totally Lishma? If he's doing it just to learn what to do?
It's not the highest levels of the Shema, but it's not completely Shalei Lishma either. So I told you there are many levels of the Shema. The highest levels is when you're doing it completely for God, to be Mamshech Ein Sof. But there are levels, like to know what to do, is somewhere in between. I mean, based on my knowledge, when you learn Chassidus and learn even in Nigla, there are many levels of Shalei Lishma and Lishma. So I would say it's somewhere on the spectrum. It's not the highest, it's not the lowest. It's just like tzedakah. You could do tzedakah for very pure intentions. You could do it for personal gain, selfish reasons. You could also do it unknowingly, and you completely don't even want to give tzedakah, but like you lost a coin and a poor person found it. So if you would know about it, you would want it back. It's still considered a mitzvah. That's like the ultimate. Then there's Shalei Lishma. You're doing it actually for destructive purposes. Lekanter. There's Lekanta, there's a whole, there are Gemaras that talk at length about this. If you want to learn about Torah Lishma, I would suggest other sources. The Rebbe Rashab here is just referring to it briefly, but there's a whole sugya in Chassidus and in Nigla about this topic. So if you really want to master it, I would highly suggest that instead of turning to me as your encyclopedia, you should look it up. Go open up Sfarim, and there's different mafteches indexes that talk about what Torah Lishma means, Shalei Lishma. There's plenty written on this topic. Just do a Google search in those Hebrew words. You'll come up with a whole bunch of articles that enumerate. There are probably some that actually spell out all the different levels. Okay? Okay, so we'll stop here, line 6.